So I've been eyeing up the Super NT for quite a while from Analogue, mostly because they have promised a far better experience than what enthusiasts have been seeing with things like a Retron system like a 3 or a 5 or any of those clone consoles. This is a much higher quality one. See, they've decided to go more of the hardware route when it comes to these games being displayed on your TV and played. Instead of using a standard chip that's pretty stock and then you have an emulator running alongside of it, they decided to actually design a chip that will play it through hardware rather than have to use an emulator. And because of that, it's actually lagless according to them, and it's 1080p at 60 frames per second. So I was intrigued right away. Now this came out, over a year ago, year and a half ago or something. So it's been a little while, but now that I have it, I thought we'd check it out. I'd see if I could trick it a bit, maybe trip it up with some different games that one that I've put together to see if I could trick it, and then another one that I don't really see a lot of these emulation systems actually be able to handle well. So I thought we'd check all of that out. We'll take it apart and have some fun. All right, so let's unbox this thing. Now, right on the front here, it says Analogue Super NT. This system is roughly $190, so keep that in mind. This one anyway that I got did not come with a controller. I had to get my own controller. What I ended up using was my the 8-bit DO controller, the Pro controller. The joysticks, they actually work in-game, by the way, and a retro receiver. So one of these guys that lets you plug it into a Super Nintendo system, a stock one. This will actually work completely fine. This pairing, I believe they even offer these to come with it if you'd like, or at least the SNES 30 rather than the SNES 30 Pro. You can actually get those to be added on if you would like, but I already had them, so I just basically got this system here. Now it even says here FPGA, unparalleled compatibility. So again, they're using a chip inside of the system that is doing all of this at a hardware level rather than a software level with emulation, which is awesome. USB cable, power supply, the Super Nintendo, or the Super NT itself, Super Turrican Director's Cut, and Super Turrican 2, both digital, are on board here. So hey, there you go. It's a nice little thing to come with it, and a USB cable. So let's go ahead and pop this guy open. Very, very basic box. Nothing fancy going on here, and we're greeted right away with the system. So this is our Super NT. It actually has a bit of heft to it at the bottom. The top feels a bit more hollow and light, very plasticky, of course, but on the bottom it has some serious weight to it. So we'll see what's going on in there when we open it up. And put that to the side. Underneath we have a little manual pamphlet that I believe also talks a bit about Super Turrican there, and then it kind of goes over a couple different things. Make sure your cartridges are cleaned, obviously. Take some alcohol or something to it to clean up those pins real well before you pop it in there, especially if you're getting them from like flea markets and stuff. You don't want to dirty up the new pins in this Super NT. Other than that, though, there's nothing else in there. It's just like this piece of plastic, and that's kind of it. This is the rest of our accessories. So like I said, I didn't have a controller or anything comes with it. HDMI cable. We have our USB cable, and then a power brick. This is a 2.1 amp brick, so if you have anything similar to this, it should work fine, but this is branded and everything, so I guess you could just use this one if you'd like. But I have several 2.5 amp, 2.5 amp bricks around, so I just used what I had at the time, and I didn't really use any of that stuff, to be honest. So the system itself looks nice, I think, for what it is. Heavy at the bottom, like I said, and it has this nice rubberized grip to the bottom, so if you put it down, it's very difficult to move, which comes in handy more than you would think when you're, of course, putting a cartridge in and you're trying to push down and you don't want to wiggle around. The front here has our Super Nintendo ports, so we have 2 controller ports as we expect, 1 and 2 with little dots there. On the side we have an SD card slot. A little more on that in a second. Let me just move over to the back. HDMI, power, and that is actually it. We, of course, have our full cartridge slot at the top here that does support the larger pins on the outside for things like Super FX games. Those are all compatible. Now, SD card slot was generally used for upgrading firmware. However, people have actually managed to jailbreak the system, quote unquote, and now you can actually play games directly off of the SD card, so it kind of has its own pass-through similar to what the Super Nintendo to SD has right now. That cartridge you can buy. this has that, but people are still kind of working with getting things like the enhancement chips, like a Super Effects chip, for example, the MSU chip, different things working through here other than just the stock games that don't have chips. So keep that in mind as well. Seems like there's a full scene around that right now. So honestly, this system is what, 190? One of those SNES 2 SD is similar to that. So if they can get full functionality out of the slot, this system becomes a steal at that point. So keep that in mind. That's actually pretty cool. So I decided to pick a few games for this, some basics, and I picked some that were a bit harder to play, and I thought we'd go over those real quick and also show you gameplay. So if you have the 60 frames per second thing set up down there on the YouTube settings, you might want to do that because some of these games are of course running at a higher frame rate and everything, just so you can get the full experience out of it, because this will run as you would expect a Super Nintendo completely to run this, but it's much cleaner. I mean, like, way cleaner. I turned it on and I couldn't believe it. It looks so much better on my monitor. So let's go through some of the games that I actually played, and I'll even show you some of the cartridges here. I started with, of course, you guys know me, Mega Man X. So I popped this guy in and off we went, and it looked stellar on my monitor. It really looks good. If you are somebody who wants a new age Super Nintendo experience, this is the way to go. Absolutely. Now, I will say it is more expensive than something like a Retron 5 even, which plays a lot more, but I do have that thought of quality over quantity when it comes to that, quantity being the amount of games the Retron 5 can play, and of course, the fact that it's emulating a lot of them with generally free emulators, but much better experience with combined with the monitor. Everything was super responsive, and it looked great. Great start there. F-Zero, I wanted to get some games that were kind of fast, so F-Zero, of course, very quick. Looked good for what it's... Listen, I like F-Zero on things like the GameCube, but I went back and played it here, and it's not my favorite game on the Super Nintendo, just because I think there are better versions of it. But it looked fine, it played great, very, very fast, the speed was there, and responsive completely. So F-Zero was fine. I also picked up, of course, Super Mario Kart, because, I mean, that's like a game that everyone plays on the Super Nintendo. And I went ahead and played that as well, and had a great time. I think this one, when I was playing it, the colors really popped off the screen. This is the one that I was starting to play, and I said, wow, this looks amazing on my display here through the Super NT. Just, I think the colors in general, when they popped off the screen, was really like a wow moment for me on that. Now, let's move over to some games that I didn't necessarily know if this thing would be able to run correctly, I guess, or well, or even at all. So, I of course wanted to start with an enhancement chip. So I started with Doom. Now, there are way better ways to play Doom, specifically on something like a PC, at the time especially, but when they moved it over, I thought it was pretty impressive that they were even able to do that, and they used the GSU-2, or basically the Super Effects chip, the second one. Now, people get this kind of mixed up. The Super Effects chip, the second iteration, was mostly designed so that they could fit a larger chip on there, so they could get like a 16 megabit chip, rather than 8 megabit chip, which is what Star Fox ran on. So that's why this mostly existed. But it looked fine. It ran as well as it could. And honestly, every enemy like that's more than a few feet away from you looked like pixels. But the Super NT did what it could with what it had to work with. And yeah, better ways to play it. But it worked fine, and it looked as good as it could, I guess, on a display. So I started to get a little crazy with it. I said, okay, let's get a ROM hack, and let's move it to an SA1 board of a game that is not supposed to be that game, and this is what it looks like now. I went ahead and put this together before the video just so I could test it out, because I wanted to throw something crazy at it. I'm not going to tell you what donor cart this is, because I know there are people who make repros, I'm sure, or for hobby, or they might even sell them or something. But if you're doing these for hobby and you want an SA1 board, you're probably hoping I don't say what donor board this is, because I even went and looked it up, and the thing is still like $7, and you could take it and technically turn it into Mario RPG. This is actually Mario RPG Armageddon, which was a ROM hack that I liked back in the day, because it took Mario RPG, it made it harder, but then they also added a ton of like extra endgame stuff to it, which was pretty cool. And it played fine. I couldn't believe it. I popped it in, started up, and the reason I say that is because several other devices, like the Retron 3, for example, I remember struggling with this. It just wouldn't boot. I think I was able to get it boot once out of every 10 tries. It booted instantly on the Super NT. Looked good, looked fine. It's Mario RPG, and I was really happy with that. So, I wanted to try one more thing. Something that these systems, not necessarily this one, but other systems would always struggle with. They would hardly ever boot it, if at all, and that was Star Ocean. This is Star Ocean Unpacked. Now, if you don't know about Star Ocean, it used an SDD1 chip, and the reason it did that was because it was actually very large when you would unpack it and use it. I think a lot of that had to do with the audio for the most part. Visuals, it looks good, but this one is fully unpacked, so it's actually a 12 megabyte game. If you hold it, it's actually very heavy because I had to put it together with 3 chips in here that are very heavy, but it works fine on something like a regular Super Nintendo. I popped it in a Super NT, and wouldn't you know it, it worked fine. I was very happy. This is actually a game that has voiceover in the beginning, by the way, which is pretty neat, but it works fine, no issues at all, popped right up, and that was the coolest thing ever, was to see Star Ocean running through HDMI, 1080p, just like you would expect a Super Nintendo to play. Super happy with this system, and when I saw this pop up, I said, okay, yeah, the system's got it. It's got it all. It'll take care of it. So they're going to keep working, I'm sure, on the SD card slot for playing these games like this one. I don't know if this would work completely, but it works fine if you have a cartridge built for it. Or if you have a Super Famicom version of Star Ocean, of course, it's technically in Japanese, but that should work as well. Okay, so now we've kind of talked about it and looked over it and everything, let's see if we can figure out how to take this apart. And the reason I say figure out is because there's no screw holes anywhere. Like, there's no obvious spots for screws. Now, my first thought was that it's underneath of this, like, rubberized matting. So maybe we can actually peel this guy away, get under it, and yep, okay. So there we go. There are some screws. Oh, they're torque screws. Man, they're just messing with me today. All right, fine. I was hoping they would just use, like, Phillips head screws, and I don't even know if there are any underneath, like in the middle here. I'm hoping there are just some on the corner so I can peel it away like that, unscrew them, and get inside. So, okay, I guess I'll get some Torx drivers and we'll rip this guy apart. These screws actually kind of remind me of the Xbox 360 screws that go around the perimeter of that. So I pulled those 4 off. Hopefully there's nothing like dead center of this, or that would be really annoying because the whole thing has to be ripped off. Let's see if we can get this guy to lift up. Okay, no, you know what? It's lifting. Let me see. Oh, there we go. All the buttons fell out. That's fine, though. Yeah, okay, cool. Very cool. Okay, so we have our flap is separate. You can actually take that off, too. So our buttons fell out. I guess those are power and reset. Let's put it over there. And that is actually everything right in front of us. We have 1 screw here. I'm curious why it weighs so much, to be honest. Let me actually... There's another screw here, too. Okay, so we have a couple screws. Makes sense to put screws around where the cartridge slot is, considering people are going to be ripping at that, of course, that cartridge connector. We have Analogue printed right on the board there. They just put weights in there. Okay. They put some weight in here, it looks like, just straight up, probably just to make it heavier so it's not, like, super loose. Because without this, if I just hold this up like this, it's very, very light. Like, if you didn't have this in here, it would be really, really light. So I guess that makes sense. That way it's not easy to move around as much when you're popping the cartridge in and out. But this is actually our system right here. So let's kind of take a look around this guy. So taking a look at the FPGA that they have here on the board, it's the Altera Cyclone 5. That's actually one that Intel has. And they have it set up for kind of a low power solution for something like, well, I guess a project, but this would be obviously for the Super NT. And the entire system is pretty much designed to be running with that chip in mind for things like your Super Nintendo games. Directly next to it, I did spot 128 megabits of SD RAM that I guess would be used with that chip. And then next to that, of course, we have an HDMI scaler chip that then runs out for things like 1080p at 60 hertz, 60 frames per second is what we'd be looking for. And it overall is a pretty low power solution. Doesn't give off a lot of heat, obviously. You don't even have like a heatsink or anything on it just to passively cool it. And the board itself, as I look over it, is very, very solid. It's a very thick board, and it just feels very quality. I do also, by the way, like kind of they went, instead of like a standard green, for example, they went with kind of like this black PCB, and I actually really like the look of it. I think it's very, very clean looking there. But overall, it's a very simple idea. Most of it has to do with them designing and programming for everything to kind of exist with this chip in mind. And it really shows when you're playing it, the games, it looks great, it plays well, it's very responsive, and really looking at this from like a hardware perspective, it is quality. So honestly, at the price, I'm not like mad about it or anything buying it for, you know, $190. I think it's just a good quality product. We also have pin sets up here. I assume that's for like debugging or something. It's not plugged into anything. And then our SD card slot, of course, is over here. It's actually where they chose to put the Super NT, and I assume some kind of identifying model number there. The switches are all tactile. They're not designed to click in and stay in. They pretty much just click and that's it. But yeah, nothing really crazy that could fail here. We do have a large fuse here that I guess could technically pop if it needed to, but because we're running off of USB, most likely it'll be okay, as long as you don't get too crazy with what it's being plugged into or anything. So overall, I have to say, this looks good. And that's going to do it for the Super NT. I think what this comes down to most of all is quality. And it's really going to be up to you if this would be worth a $190 purchase. I will at least say, if that SD card slot continues to be kind of worked on by the hacking community, and eventually everything works through it, I mean, this thing's a steal then for what it offers. But if you're buying it for the sole purpose of playing games, specifically through the cartridge slot, then that's going to be up to you if it's worth it. I think it's worth it better to save up for this rather than buy something like a Retron 2, for example, or a lower end clone system, because most times those will have issues or they'll break or they won't play all of the games that you want them to. Whereas this is pretty much 100% compatible, and yeah, it's roughly 2 to 3 times more than one of those $6 systems, but again, it really comes down to quality over that. But let me know what you guys think about the Super NT down below. I think it's probably one of the best systems I've used to play a Super Nintendo game, and it is fully compatible with your HDMI TV, and it looks really good when you play it. So let me know, guys, down below, though. Make sure you like the video if you like, dislike if not, and I'll see you guys in the next video.